Eh, Buenas tardes. Bueno, de nuevo, muchas gracias por venir y por la acogida que está teniendo este ciclo. Esta vez, para quien no estuvo en la otra ocasión, es un ciclo que es la segunda edición. La primera se hizo en el 2010, o sea, hace mucho, ¿2010? ¿2017? Sí. Que se invitaron a... Bueno, el formato era el mismo, era traer gente de Europa para ventilarnos, para hablar de otras cosas y no hablar de ladrillos y tochanas, que es un poco de lo que se estaba hablando. Bueno, con quien estuvo el otro día con Banchini, ahora viene para hacer los dos italianos, pero no, Banchini es suizo y Francesca sí que es italiana, de Génova. Y tiene una trayectoria muy singular, muy particular y muy delicada, que veréis. Así que grazie mille per venire, per averte qui. Mi italiano es horrible ya, pero bueno, muchas gracias. Quien presenta esta vez es Alonso Atienza, del estudio Atienza-Maure, que como os he dicho, yo me voy a quitar esta responsabilidad y les voy a pasar la bola a otra gente más joven.
Vale. Hola Francesca, bienvenida. Lo primero, agradecer a Moisés por haber organizado este ciclo y por la oportunidad de presentarte, que nos hace mucha ilusión. La verdad es que admiramos mucho tu obra. Voy a hacer como un pequeño recorrido a tu biografía y un par de reflexiones sobre tu obra. Entonces, bueno, Francesca, para los que no lo conozcan, estudió en Delft, Barcelona, Mendrisio y Venecia, donde se graduó en 2001, trabajó entre otros con Peter Zumthor y en 2008 fundó su propio estudio en Génova. Ha sido invitada a la Biennale de Venecia de 2016 y actualmente es profesora en la Academia de la Arquitectura de Mendrisio. Voy a compartir una cita suya sobre la técnica, muy breve, que es un interés que tenemos en común nuestro estudio y el tuyo, que dice, en todos nuestros proyectos siempre hay un experimento constructivo, pero ese nunca es el propósito. Parece que simplemente llegamos allí para encontrar una solución capaz de combinar diferentes variables. La mayoría de las veces, la variable más delicada es el silencio, esa naturalidad en la que no es necesario ver todo el esfuerzo. Muy bonito. Esta cita es bastante esclarecedora sobre su modo de trabajar, con paradojas o dualidades que aparecen una y otra vez en sus textos y conferencias. Racionalidad e intuición, técnica y narrativa, construcción y mito, lógica y experiencia subjetiva, precisión y libertad. Como Francesca es bastante activa en Instagram, también voy a diseccionar muy brevemente su obra de la manera en la que se planteó en el ciclo de charlas post-like aquí en el COAC hace un par de años. Porque para los que no lo conozcáis, su perfil de Instagram no enseña su propia obra, sino que es una colección de fragmentos de paisajes, naturalezas, pinturas, esculturas y espacios que funcionan como un archivo interminable de recuerdos y que es tremendamente evocador. Esta sucesión cronológica aparentemente espontánea es un reflejo preciso y honesto de su propia obra y su manera de entender la arquitectura como un continuo de categorías difusas. Cada elemento tiene la misma importancia y forma parte de un todo interconectado, donde la realidad física no se comprende sin sus asociaciones subjetivas con la memoria individual y colectiva. Y si voy muy rápido me dices. Sí. Lo constructivo y lo material se tratan con el mismo rigor, ya que, como ella misma explica, mi investigación no es romántica, sino basada en métodos científicos. Lo mismo ocurre en su página web, donde en la sección de trabajos aparecen sillas, copas, túnicas, herrajes, soportes, proyectos no construidos y obras terminadas. Todo se presenta con el mismo valor, igualando un pomo de puerta con un campus deportivo en Suiza. Esta atención, o más bien obsesión, por el detalle y por el proyecto en todas sus escalas, es cada vez menos frecuente en la arquitectura contemporánea y es realmente fascinante cómo Francesca consigue moverse entre todas ellas, manteniendo siempre la misma calidad. Y bueno, muchas gracias, Francesca.
Gracias a vos.
Bueno.
La técnica y controlar que no voy a hacer enfadar a Giorgi. Y bueno, Alonso, después de esa introducción soy tan emocionada que no sé si puedo hablar. Y vamos a ver. Agradezco mucho a Moisés y al COA que me han invitado esa noche para compartir unas cuantas historias que son experiencias y reflexiones. Y es de verdad una tarde bastante emocionada para mí porque viví aquí en Barcelona para un año, hace 25 años. Y hay aquí amigos de muy lejano, y entonces vamos a ver si voy a hacer bien. Y se le pregunto a Paul, ayuda. Unas cuantas historias, no voy a presentar un proyecto de manera específica. Es como un ir de paseo para compartir demandas, cuestiones, reflexiones que son un punto de vista sin alguna pretesa que sea verdad. Y en razón de mi pobre vocabulario español, las cuantas historias van a ser en inglés. Si no se entiende, me paráis, decéis, no se entiende. Y vamos a ver cómo se improvisa. The historical cities are the backdrop of our daily life, and they are witness to the act of building, growing over pre-existences by transforming places inhabited by others, and by our inhabiting them with our needs, habits, and also rituals. And in the European context that I'm more familiar to, rarely this process of transformation has contradicted the first settlements. Rather, there have been a coexistence of, is it difficult in English? Shall I try in Spanish? Okay. There is rather a coexistence of endings and beginnings. So, like Johan Huizinga was writing in the waning of the Middle Age already hosted a Renaissance. So, Renaissance palaces over ruins and foundations of Roman theaters or medieval plots. And as well, behind the modern facades of Baron Haussmann, still fragments of old Paris remain. All of this very slow process of transformation hence results into an archaeology that testifies the endurance of sound urban structures, but more importantly, testifies endurance of what people found worth. In 1955, there was a meeting in Milano held by Ernesto Nathan Rogers, who was at the time director of Casabella Continuità, an Italian magazine, but at the time there was a very intense cultural dialogue and debate in Europe after citizens were really harmed and wounded by World War I and World War II. And there the question was if there was space for building an identity, if there was space within the heritage of modern movement for figures, tradition, what is our relation with tradition? Franco Albini and Franca Helg in 1955 proposed to discern the constants and thoroughly investigate variables. What does it mean? It's not math. It means to understand what can survive and find meaning for other societies different from a past one or a contradicting one, and what is just representing our way of living, producing, and existing, but is always in permanent movement. So I invite you to look backwards and forwards, but let's start with a question. How do we experience spaces? And I observe that our senses gather information that our mind constantly recombines into a whole. It is always lapses. We continuously also with our gaze, we look there, but we also see what we don't see, what we remember we saw an instant we are not aware before. And so we have La Pedrera, you recognize because it's the home of Pedrera, but it is a vaulted ceiling, and then we can see a threshold and pillars, an opening, or a terrace. And how is it possible alone so that we can recognize a terrace, but we never lived a similar experience together? How is it possible that we can share an understanding of a room even if we never went together in the same room, and we have the different backgrounds. There is a sort of need for composing a whole, but somehow clinging on stories, histories and stories. So there was a beautiful writing by Claude Lévi-Strauss that was introducing this mythical thinking, no? Where myth is important. We live of fairy tales and folk stories. Everywhere there is a tradition that everybody knows of, the wisdom of somewhere. That's something believable, but it is open, precise and open. I observe that our minds constantly compose fragments of culture, of past lives, and lives that are not yet there, imagination, into something that is plausible, precise, but open. If we look, for example, at the square of Pienza, it is a square, it is a masterpiece of Renaissance, often associated to the ideal city. But if we jump into Blow Up, a movie by Michelangelo Antonioni, that was the first one that was shot in London, we find the Economist building by Alison Peter Smithson, that is also a masterpiece, which lives of this terrace overlooking a landscape raised above the city. And is it that difference that the landscape is London City or the landscape of Piero della Francesca? It is something we can share, a way of being. So there are associations that are genuine and believable, recognized by people, beyond form, beyond figure, beyond language. Aldo Rossi wrote very sharply that the emerging of relations among things, more than things themselves, always poses new meanings. What does it mean? It means that things to be lived needs to be invested on a meaning which is alive for us, time present, on which other people that we'll never meet, because we will be gone, can also build upon and find home. But that it also has memory, because nothing exists out of nothing. When we were invited to make the extension and the renovation of the House for Art in Belgium, which was extending a very fine building from 1958, we started drawing the street in front of the building, drawing the courtyards, drawing the passage, even if we had no assignment for that. But we needed to have a sort of tone, understanding of the city, of all the wandering through the folds of walls, through the passage that exists in the city of Hasselt, where you have a shortcut and you enter a passage from a street and you meet a treasured garden or another courtyard or again another street. And so Hasselt is clearly a medieval city, which is molded by water. And the Beguinhof, the Beguinage, which is a typology from the lowlands of the north, resembles an island. And this urban island was highly transformed during time. They buried rivers, they demolished buildings and erected new ones, and yet, during all these centuries, the built border around this garden was protected. Means people found making sense, it was important that it would be kept as a unity, because there was a space, which was a garden. With a church, the church was bombed, but still there is a garden. And all of these buildings built with different purpose, scope, and of different epoch. Gin factory, housing from the 18th century, a place of representation, civic representation like a museum. They all also shared a urban portamento, which is of being enclosed introvert toward the street and opening in a filigree of windows towards the garden. And our extension building wished to be part of this sort of, it's like a folk song, an authorial wisdom, where there is just a 60-meter long wall, height 12 meters, with just some thresholds of shadow, where you just encounter again a courtyard which is non-different, or better, is familiar to other places that you encounter in the city. But the language is different. Towards the interior, the openings take on the rhythm of the neighboring buildings. They're not miming a measure, they're not miming a proportion, they're not miming the construction. A wall, it is a tectonic wall. It is load-bearing. It's not a cladding. Each brick weighs almost 1 kilo, but it's also resembling a painting. So our perceptions are quite multifaceted, ambivalent. The interior, you meet again the exterior with a mouillon. Mouillon is like a bifora, no? And then, is it drawn? Is it a mouillon? I believe in ambivalencies. I think that the soul of people needs to be constantly alive and moved by ambivalencies. The extension building is an ensemble of rooms, and each of the rooms is organized in an urban maze, familiar but different from other parts of many historical cities, where the courtyards are gardens that offer a moment of oniric, where you discover the garden that is of the Begainov at another scale. So it expands and gives a pace. And each room you could name by a name. So a small room, a bridge, a tower, a loggia. And we were calling them so, the alley, but then they were calling so the builders, also the workers, now the staff, and suddenly also the visitors. So it means that when we go to the grocery or we go to take a cafe like in Plata del Pi, we say, I saw yesterday a place you don't know. It was really a tower, such a sky, or I was in a bridge. Does it matter specifically what bridge it is? It is the bridge. But then there are more dialogues which are expressed because there were two wings by which it to be a building. And so all details are a continuous assonance of a representation of a civic value. So it is undry, but it also disposes dialogues of spaces you encounter between one wing and the other, like a terrace opening towards the existing context, or you may encounter a sound triptych threshold, or very long crossed perspectives, and wandering around from one wing to the other, you meet some kind of kindred experiences, but is it only of that wing, or may we encounter also maybe an Italian Palladian villa? Thresholds are the architectural device that helps to put into relation one space with the other, becoming very thin until they become so thin that you are outside and the garden is a trompe-l'œil. In the project of the in China of the Bishan Dance School, where we had to give home for a school that was combining the research by Pina Bausch with the traditional dance, which is wonderful. It was a pupil of Pina Bausch. And here we multiplied this constant interchanging of interior and exteriors. And the element to create these filters is a pillar that draws from the tradition of the culture of wood construction, staggering wood, and we do it mineral. Is it appropriate? Are we making a fake? I don't think so. It is an allusion, like Mark Bloch was suggesting, when it is needed more nuances of verbal tone, so that people could recognize something of their memory, their culture. So the pillar is multiplied and draws all enfilades, filters that draw courtyards inside an existing courtyard, which is the site of the ancestor temple. And we had inside this beautiful site, there is an ancestor temple, which is with no religious rituals, but is spiritual, is a kind of place for the civic society. There was the perimetral wall, and then it was occupied then in the 50s of the 20th century by just warehouses, agricultural warehouses. And all this scenography, persistent scenography of porticos includes all the existing as part of this double face scene where you could dance in a garden, you could dance in the court, you could dance in the temple. There is never a back and front, or better, they always can change, to multiply the scene, which was one of the beautiful teachings of Pina Bausch. And then in a corner grows a tower, which is a tool of orientation and also of ordinance, that speaks with another civic tower in the countryside. But these courtyards is something new, nothing invented really. This is a stone grave from Han Dynasty, from 200, which is representing a village which is made of courts, and then we just inhabited with more courtyards an existing court. And is what exists always material, or is something that lives in the mind and that you meet also in your daily? And that is just under your eyes in the ancestral temple, where we have a threshold. You enter the temple and then you meet the pillars, which are tracing a long perspective, and then they become a scene because they have length. And then you pass over, you discover there is a pace of light that brings you into a domestic scale, and then you enter the house and you meet another courtyard, which is a pocket of space which is smaller, and then you go out, and we meet that also in our building, which is this offices and services and also theater. But it's all there. So those big surfaces of the pitched roofs are meant to collect water, gather it into the courtyard, and then drive it to the fields for agriculture. So all this way of inhabiting cannot be silenced by an act of building. I think that building can reveal wisdom of time past and what has set place. In a completely other place of China, in this fabled scenery of lime karst peaks that were weathered by water and rain, there is a river that flows, the Yangshu. And along this river, a string of woods of bamboo draws the scenography of the river. And there you see emerging very tiny wood constructions in form of a tower, which is a way to transfer information from a curve, a meander of the river and the other. And the information might have been of danger, of festivity. And right in this meander, we were asked to design a library for the teacher of the village, of the neighboring village, that had no place where to read to children, and placing it here, combining it with a program of cultural events, welcoming film directors and actors from a facility of hospitality nearby, it would be possible to invite the municipality to take care and maintain all the path going through the bamboo woods and reaching the village. And we thought to make a tower so that it could be part of this inhabiting the river, following tradition. It is a core of concrete with a concrete spiral staircase, because here the flood reaches 3 meters. We wanted it to be safe. And the base is a cryptoporticos where children could play around, and then they would go up the staircase and reach the library that has outside a terrace with all the books along the perimeter, an internal facade. And when you go up, you could reach this belvedere and meet the other towers in the other meander of the curves. So most important for us was to inhabit the river in manner of the phoneme of the place and taking care in that way of the river, because the only way of preserving is inhabiting. We work with a family and with a client to start making a test of mock-up for the bamboo construction, because on the pigmented concrete structure, there would be growing all a structure of wood built by knotting, so learning from the culture of weaving and knotting baskets, and so that by this weaving we could have a myriad of segments of linear lines becoming a curve that could take on the basis of shadow and light of the landscape. I use often this word phoneme of places because I have not found a better word, and if you may advise me, I would be very happy. Phoneme, I appreciate, it comes from Lévi-Strauss. I was speaking about mythem. So that thing that we all can recognize, that thing that we know even if we did not live, that thing that makes the identity, even if we can be red, green, purple, or various form, precise and open. What is always the obsession, indeed, as Alonso was saying, is how can we be part of a longer history? We want to grow on history. We don't want to cut it. And there was a beautiful passage by Virginia Woolf that was, in fact, saying that the reason why things survive is that they change meaning, but they are recognizable. This was one of the last interviews of Pina Bausch. I find a gem. I almost cannot really read it to you. I advise it. So how to recognize places. And it's not about the genius loci suggested by Norbert Schulz that I strongly admire, or maybe the analog reading by Aldo Rossi. I'm searching for something different that can include this phoneme, which is not landing in any toolkit, in fact. In Liguria, there is the sea. There are oak woods that run towards the sea. And there is such a steep terrain that people in centuries have built lengths of dry stone walls longer than the Chinese wall, just to have some flat land to cultivate and live. And all of this process of making livable a place takes lengths of time, and it has a structure where inevitably people build on. So like our length of life in the discipline of architecture is a nothing, is a blink compared to the millennia of this wondrous art, cultural art. We are working in a location which is facing the sea on the Roman road Via Aurelia, where there are two headlands, Punta dell'Aspera and Punta dell'Olmo, that run to the sea with in between a torrentious river. And here we are working with a program which is residential and of leisure and sport facilities for the public. But more interesting, it is a lapse of landscape that sounds like an encyclopedia of the cultural way of inhabiting the landscape of Liguria. We have a grotto carved in rocks on the sea. We have a palazzo. We have a borgo. Briefly, this place arrived so virgin in a way to present time because in 1865 a young doctor from Bergamo bought a vastness of lands which were very cheap at the time because there was no humus, so you don't really plant anything. And since he was driven by the visions of the Risorgimento, he wanted to build marine hospices for children. He was standing for civic society, and he built them in form of palaces. And Professor Ennio Poleggi, who studied very thoroughly the 16th century culture in Genova, named a civilization of palaces, when it's also the first European operation of real estate, which is quite impressive. Like they were doing real estate to welcome the VIPs, which were kings, popes, bishops. And they built palaces to represent and celebrate with festivity their culture. And it was making artificial scenographies of terraces, loggias, gardens, and we wished to have a palazzo on the sea, so it could be part of this culture. And learning clearly from how these very pragmatic entrepreneurs were managing the ground and inventing another ground. Villa di Plinio, so we call the project, is a building approximately 60 meters by 60 on 8 floors, of which 2 underground, that is settling on existing topography. We have in the back the mountain, in front we have the sea. On the side we have the riverside, and under there is a gallery of train rail. the palace has points of axiality, so it belongs to a classic tradition, but then it adjusts when it meets the existing. Like also here we have towards the sea the expression of classic palazzo, but then the wicks are diffused. This palazzo, therefore, is classic, but it is distant from the abstraction of a classic plan. It has irregularities. Is that blaspheme? We don't think so. It is adjusting. And that's very interesting because palaces and villas in the cultural tradition are the cultural places. Also a beautiful book by Rikvert that speaks about the villa. They are the place of idleness where you can dream of another place. Like you are, it's the place where urban citizens dream of an Eden. And so they relate to a much vaster landscape. Landscape expands from a building. It is not the next door, but it is at kilometers and kilometers. Carl Friedrich Cicle in 1835 was tracing with wondrous watercolor the storytelling of Pliny the Younger to a dear friend, like saying, my house is wonderful, and there were no plans, no drawings at all. He was just having the storytelling of a room, then I hear a fountain, I make a courtyard. And it is so real and vivid that Friedrich Cicle made these watercolors of fantasy, of imagination. I prefer, maybe it's a more respectful word. And he was building an experience of landscape, which is this constant alternation of scales of perception, where you are intimate and extrovert towards the landscape. You discover the landscape as a representation, as orienting. You recognize where you are, but at the same time also you have ordinance because you control the lens, like a Palladian villa. So it works at kilometers. At the same time, if you follow the different perception of the spaces, here we are on a terrace, and so the garden is disposed like a low scene for this terrace where all this enfiladed screenery is looking the garden. Then we have a very same facade becomes thinner, and then we are like in a portico because the place is so intense. And then when we suddenly turn again, we have all the sequence of the garden, which is even sharpening this perception of rhythm. So works together with the short width and the rhythm of the openings. So it's amazing. We are by far not good as Cicle, but we were thinking about this experience of landscape, so that at the public floor, Piano Nobile, where you have all the restaurant that is unraveling around the public swimming pool and spa with a backdrop of a garden towards the wall. Here you have a court of garden that we call the Theatre of Shadows, that in fact lives with all the depth of the valley of the river, if you remember the model. So it is approximately a kilometer part of that scene, and so the sea, and so on the side. 3 floors of development of the residential with a crowning, and you see that all of these dwellings revel around a Eden garden, which is on the roof of the swimming pool. The urbanity of the palace is given by the persistent rhythm of the vertical elements, the pillars, that of course draw from tradition as expression and language and proportion, but so to offer inside a disposition of the living which is modern. It's like the liberation of the space from what we know, the case studies of John Intensa, just wandering around, and we don't have the traditional or classic conventional enfilade of one room after another. It's more like a pavilion of where you overlook the sea and the landscape around. In order to make this construction, to have different spatial disposition of the living at various floors, we have and also to be as small as possible, to not be dominant or loud in the landscape, we have prefabricated beams, prefabricated floors, prefabricated pillars, which are a twin of 2 blade pillars, 110 millimeter per 360. So it's like less than my shoulder. You chop a shoulder of me, that's 36, and then it is 12, which is so. It is prefab concrete, very slim. We needed that to be small, and also to have a present which was tuned. And so we started reflecting how can we use the patent of Pierluigi Nervi that was operating after World War II while we are in 2025 with excruciating insurances, and we are in front of the sea and everything cracks. And we have fire regulations. How do we do? So we have developed a structure. Indeed, it is, the structure is steel. It's just steel. So we have your iPhone, no? At the bottom that starts 60 by 60. This that you see here is a more cautious drawing by the engineer, but now we have advanced from that. So 60 by 60. Then next floor is 58, 58, 56, 56, 54, 54. So it goes so thin. It is a square. For each pillar is like a upside down table that takes the head of steel of the beam only for 15 millimeter. And then you say, are you crazy? No, because then when you lock it, everything is stable. Just you feel the hole without a steel. And in that way, we can dress this very thin structure of steel with 25 millimeter of concrete. You say, how don't you have the cracks? That's the patent. We're making a patent so that we avoid the cracks, because of course dilatation of steel kicks more than the concrete. But all of this was just to be a palazzo, and we wanted to be small. As Alonso was saying, we had so many problems to solve. And the expression is not spectacular, it's just a stone, one would say. So we've been mixing sands and stones so that we would be tuned in color with existing landscape, like has happened so many times, and here by the hand of a master that I highly respect, Perret, just to have a palazzo overlooking the sea. Then there we are also confronted with a very difficult question. If you have a program of 49 apartments, 20,000 cubic meters, in a beautiful wood of very old oak trees, and you have some very ugly buildings from the 70s by Italcementi that have to be demolished and leave a print, so everything is quite proportional, but they are monsters, so we have to take them away and we use their ruins. But how do you settle housing for 20,000 cubic meters with a meaning? So we said, what happened? Borgo. We have been studying the popular villages on the hills of Genova because it's settled on the steepest hill of the property, and also archaeological sites like the Palace of Cnosso, Pompeii, Ercolano, all the Domus Romana, because there is today this very sharp question on sustainability. We believe that it's very complex and articulated. Part of the question of sustainability is also how do we build something that more likely can be inhabited by people we will never know and we cannot even imagine in a century or two. And incredibly, historical architecture is very welcoming various types of life. And so we were reflecting how can be like archaeological sites. This is the project. You have small rooms, bigger rooms, interior rooms, exterior rooms, bigger exterior rooms, and they all together create an urban maze where people can interpret a way of living. And this archaeology for the future started then from a house. It is then with entrance. It's very simple. You enter, you have the living, where it is a kind of a square that then it comes repeated. You have bedrooms with their bathrooms, so it's a generous way of living. But the surprising thing is that this one typology, disposed in the context, generates this. Only one typology, like an archaeological site. And that is our interest. How can we give a foundation of living that is open for the future, like archaeological sites and Domus Romana are for us, have been for Middle Age, Renaissance, and so on. And therefore, it was very important, first, to build on the topography, to reveal it, to be economical with that, but also respectful. Then to dispose these various territories of the entrances on topography, the various territories of public, semi-public, private, semi-private, and then to have a garden of trees. This is the model on topography. They are buildings on 3 floors, a little bit of 4, but you see that at the end they just create small squares. And this is then developed a typology case. I'm going fast. The project of trees means that we are making the study in 50, 10, 30, 5, 10, 30, 50, and 100 years, because we wish that the project is not creating a break in the landscape. So it is born as a garden of trees, where all the buildings just accompany the existing topography, and it is similar, non-different from what is happening in just a village 50 kilometers from our location. So we are really not inventing much. I keep on repeating that. But we cannot copy what was there, the vernacular. This is a quick scan of the topography, the settlement, and when you're growing, we're literally building, like they've been always doing, fasce, which are those flat lands to live and cultivate, in our case, not cultivating orchards, but planting trees. And each place has a kind of phoneme of places known in Genova. We have Piazzetta, we have Salto, we have Salita, like here you have Carrere, Passage, no? You have all places that already they have some features. A calle cannot be a passage, would be very odd. You say, you gave me the wrong address. So we build on memory. To be decent companions to these old trees, which is the backdrop of the project. And when it was reflecting how to build it, we thought to build it with very long concrete bricks that are woven, laid with lime and concrete mortar, so and also reinforced punctually per horizontal, where you see the thicker joint, which is blinking to leverance, Moises, and then some vertical ones, so that in that way we really wished to have a wandering around among trees that could tune away. I apologize for the colors that are a little bit too gray still. We are now busy with prototyping, but we just wanted to be somehow not too afar from the vernacular, which means we can never replicate something that has been done. Never. We cannot build in dry stone like those beautiful examples. But we wish to have a degree of shadow that could be part of this landscape, and so be peacefully also on these very ancient walls. And if we speak of gestures or portamentos or phoneme of buildings, is it so different when we speak about objects? Like we go to archaeological museums and we find that the tool to dig the earth in Egypt is the same we use now. Form is the same. Or we find that in Phoenici had wonderful toys for children. We have cups, we have pots, we have chairs and beds. We are very interested in gestures and rituals of the bodies and of people. And so when we were invited by the Gallery Maniera to make a sofa, we thought about just laying like, backwards. To lay like we were in the 19th century when Englishmen were traveling in Arabic worlds, and we saw these ladies laying on the pillow. So just having hanging pillows. And it is a walnut construction with no screws, so it's like, I see Carlo Mezzino, and in Venice there are the forcole, that are like the keys of the car of boats, so you put it in the water to place it in place, it stays stable, and it's a bit the same. So you just place a piece of wood and stay stable as we live together in Venice. And then you hang pillows just with a stick of wood. The pillow, though, is in silk velvet, so that it can draw a landscape. Because then objects, furniture, make landscape in our living. We also have been making a low chair, which is named Paolo, as homage to the great Paul Kierholm. And it is a very thin low chair, all in steel. It is 12 millimeter. 15 millimeter, which has happened in all modern movement, not invented. And you can fold it because then you can bring it outdoor and indoor to have some ease. But the interest of Paolo was that it was a little bit larger. You can mount it as a tent, but that it was a little bit larger so you can sit with ease, and that you would not see the shoulders in this case, but you could have somebody sharing a conversation, and you can go nearby and maybe just play distractedly with the fixation of the tool, because we are full of these unaware gestures that still give us pleasure of life, that they can have place, and we are not with objects too closed, we think. Dear collaborator, Maxime. And Larga, also, that was a chair, also for Maniera, where we wished the theatrality of dining, where you have this scene, you can see the backdrop of a person, and you have ease to move your elbows, and you're not stuck, close, strict. It's quite wide, so also in that case, the ease is the elegance of gesture. Larga is a bit a mystery. It is all made with wood connections that you don't see. It seems just she wants to be together. And Larga has only 3 legs. We believe that, come to the beginning, our mind needs ease, ambivalence, and distraction, and that our senses need excitement, pause, and ambivalence. And so that everything is important at the end. It's important a screw, it's important a handle, it's important a building. And that all of this is part of our life, which is continuously changing. I'm very fond of the metamorphosis of Ovidio, because he has incredibly strong images, like a Zeus in purple and gold and crazy red. And then you have all those nymphs running away from Apollo and turning into rivers and trees. And then you have a father that was stolen the carriage and is really crying desperate, because it's really a very sad story. But it's all the stories of our lives. It's so true. It's so afar and still so true. And I think that what we do in our practice should has that. Reflect life, but also all the lives. If it changes language, we still can share and recognize. There is this debate on tradition and modernity, like tradition from time to time in history has been addressed like the authority to constrain society from development, taking away freedom, no? Freezing everything. And so revolutions were always to break these laces, break with tradition. Other times, tradition was a safekeeper. Tiny people on the shoulders of giants. But then where does modernity lay? When we were invited to make a stone pavilion for the Fair of Marmomachy in Verona, we wished to make just a tent, a stereotomic construction of stone where a person could just lift a piece of stone. Then build a wood construction, lay the blocks one over the other, but we wanted to make a tent. It was not to do a specific scientific study on stereotomy. And the question is, how do you do a lintel? How do you do a lintel in a tent? First, does a tent has a lintel? Second, if it may have a lintel, how is it? And Ruskin drew in The Seven Lamp of Truth, drew this beautiful lintel of alternated green serpentine marble and marble, which is the Dome of Prato, and which exists. And the question he poses is, are logic and necessity sufficient matter for building? I would say he suggests no, because there is need for representation, for narrative, for a story. And so, learning from Duomo di Prato, we developed our stone block. That, of course, we could make so because we have frese, we have 5 axes, and you are not with a chisel. And equally, in Padova, when this is my diploma, so it's really a very varied talk, where there was the question was how to reinactivate all the river Bacchiglione in Padova that at the time, we are now in 2000, so was really a place for rubbish and that's it. Despite having incredibly beautiful hydraulic machine that were used to make jumps, where there were jumps of the river to leave the river, so to keep on navigating on it, and there were all constructions of trachyte and of Pietradistria, there that were bonded with lead, poured lead. We wished to make, I wished to make a construction which was reinterpreting that. And so it was a dry construction of slabs of trachyte and zovonite of the hills of Padova, which are baby volcanoes never grown. So it's a very compact stone that has frailness only where you have intrusions of iron. And it is a castle of cards that is stronger than concrete, takes more load than reinforced concrete, till 11 meters, 75. This was the load test with concept. And if you notice, there are smaller courses of stone at the bottom, and they become bigger, which is like the other way around from traditional architecture. Because normally you have big blocks, smaller blocks, because you want the mass, the barycenter down. But in this case, when we have shells, so we have shell, these were 100 millimeter thick, and then means that every time you have a shell, then you have a cross one. So 2 slabs cross, 2 cross. The smaller they are, more cross slabs you have of stone, which means more mass. And so it's absolutely following the laws of physics, respecting the laws of physics to keep down the barycenter. But the expression is totally different. Just rooms, a tower, an archive for the knowledge of the river. But all this effort, at the end again, it was the wish also at that time to just be part of those towers. This was the Tower of Galilei, the observatory, just to be part of what was happening already on the river. Bacchiglione, canal would be better. And in Sorano, it's a totally different stone. It's a volcanic stone, so it's very airy. And here, this was a place where you have Rocca Paolina, territory of the popes and bishops, Orsini. And there we just wanted to be part of this amalgam landscape where people have been in time using the hill of tufa as a quarry to build up their own stones. And made a very, very, very incredibly small holiday house that is with pitched roof. Hopefully, you almost don't see it. That for us is always a great achievement. And it is built in stone, in cut stone, because we were on the historical wall of the city. And it was so small, like a room is 2 meters by 3, that you cannot, we had to be 250 millimeters thin. Otherwise, how do you enter the space? And this produces that a construction which is a Janus-faced wall construction, where all these minute that you see are not a decor. Well, they are a decor in the sense of Alberti dignity of representation, but they are also the structure, because these corner elements take each course of stones. These are all the corners inside, and they are attached with a tirante, and so you apply tension, since everything is welded. It's like you are embracing each stone at each level. Here you see the blocks, which are 120, 60, 180, and there is an overlap only of 30, so they are slightly crossed, but it's a dry construction. This just to be with a facade on the historical walls, with a wall that had stone blocks with aligned joints, like the walls of Viterbo, which are just not even 40 minutes drive from here, 1 hour, because there is all a memory we carry with us. We saw something yesterday, we remember it, of a place. And so this is like the memory one would have of Viterbo. Or in at Site 33, we wish to make a brick building with all bricks of different time, epoch, size, but we also wanted to be representative of a public institution, a sign of culture, and so there came the reflection of the antique Roman walls, and this is a photograph of a wall in Ercolano, where clearly the mortar is stronger than the tufa that was eroded by weather, and these constant examples of representation express the need of humankind through history for dignity, for being part of a longer history, that we need to not be lonely. Thank you. I hope I was not too long.
Grazie mille. Scusa, grazie mille. Come lui è il presentatore, ti farà una domanda in spagnolo e dopo apriamo al pubblico a fare più domande.
Quería profundizar bueno, muchas gracias por la presentación, ha sido increíble. Quería profundizar un poco más en una cosa que leí y que has mencionado antes, de cómo la arquitectura anterior planteaba una continuidad con cientos o miles de años y en búsqueda de una especie de belleza, de una dignidad que parece que hoy en día como que se ha perdido, al menos de manera explícita. Entonces era un poco por si podías... o sea, ¿crees que la arquitectura actual debería de manera activa buscar esa belleza y dignidad?
Comparto la pregunta y yo no pienso tener respuesta, pero voy a hablar en inglés, así también Architect Forsmark has more ease, no? If it is fine. I think that societies have features and the time that is embedded in the practice today, after industrialization, and with the widening, widespread access to studies and education, which I think is very good, has changed significantly the practice, so that there is a speed, and there are a lot of requests to keep control or address responsibility, and the system is kind of built mostly off one's table, which I think is wrong. And for many centuries, the way of building was, this has never been met before. This is new. So I think that how to rephrase or reinvent tools to grow in this continuity have really to be reinvented. What I am very interested in is precisely this continuity. This was a premise to say our time is difficult and there are a lot of constraints, so we cannot be dreamful and fiction that we are in the, not even the 20th century. You can never live another time, so this is present time. Yet there is a question on building in continuity and about dignity. I think that a worth question would be, why are buildings today so often considered or proposed as objects? Why is it so relevant that they can be resolved with one word defining a concept? And in that sense, for example, I'm a lover of Mies van der Rohe, and it is no surprise that he was such a dear friend with Schwarz. And all of his buildings are incredibly articulated. So in this sense, I don't think we can reproduce a way of producing buildings and artifacts and parts of city as happened in any other epoch and century past. But I think we can learn how we can cultivate a plurality, or at least I'm interested in that, a plurality that more likely can meet fragments of what exists or bodies of what exists from other epochs and can be more fruitful for life also, that people like to go back. If you just have clear or a building and rarely you really want to go back. No, you need something that invites you to go back to a place so you're not bored, just to start with that. And the other is a plurality that allows different grains that can be used by other with other purposes and needs. If things are too reduced in spatial relations, that I think is something allowing less capacity to build a continuity, which doesn't mean that you have to make something very articulated or complex. Pantheon is one space and is eloquent in the spatial relations. It has many scales. Like any building by Mies has an immensity of scales inside. So I cannot answer your question. I can only expand it, no?
Of course.
Because to say just I wish to build in continuity, yes, how, no? And one thing is to try to understand what is the essence and consistency of a place. And trying to be, we really try, we talk a lot, we make a lot of critique in the studio to be exposed, because I'm very scared to be tricked by my mind. I don't want to persuade myself of something that is worth only for myself. I would find that a fail.
Okay, any other questions from the public? If in English, if it's possible, if in English. No? No other questions? Italian?
O in castellano? Mamma mia, I troubled you.
Well, in any case, we can go upstairs and have a drink, beers, and we can chat in another more informal way. And remember that the next session will be next Thursday with Fala from Porto, the Portuguese studio. So let's go upstairs to have a drink.
I answered bad.
It's actually impossible to answer.
Yes.
Gracias.